Good morning and welcome to A TALANOA Live. This is our second episode in the series, and we have renamed a Yarn Live to A TALANOA Live at the request of Ian Taylor, who suggested that it's a beautiful way to frame it, that we can listen and share with respect, because this is about a future with COVID and all the different perspectives. So we're going to aim to cover a large range of people and a diverse range of people. So a bunch of our diversity is unavailable today, so we're going to be joined by Poata Wetini, who is actually now leading a COVID emergency response in Waikato, and also Sir Ian Taylor, who has apologetically got a clash judging multi-business awards. So of course he has to sit through sessions which clash with this, but he will be available at our 5 p.m. session tonight. And this is just what happens with COVID. I'm sure you're all dealing with last minute changes, emergencies and things like that yourself. So I want to pass on great thanks to both Poata and Ian for what they're doing currently, and that we'll see them tonight at 5 p.m. So to introduce our team today, I'll let them introduce themselves fully and share their 5-minute focus. And after that, we will go into a open discussion where we will look at some of the key points that have come out of today's discussion and the questions. So I'll just get the comments on now. So if I can just do a quick round where I will run past everybody and then leave the last person to introduce themselves fully and their 5-minute focus. So I'll go in the order I can see, which is Simon Martin. So I'm partner and owner of Hudson Gavin Martin. Looking very astute there in his office with all the books in the background. And to his side is Jon Foote down in Dunedin. He's got the earpiece on. So we'll be doing a session around stats with Jon. He's a data visualization specialist and has been tracking COVID since day one. So I won't premise what he's tracking. He'll tell us that, and we'll bring up the slides in a moment. Then Lisa Mead, who obviously stand out as the only woman on today's call. Thank you very much. So Lisa is a speaker and author on domestic violence and also intergenerational change. And the easy way to shape that up is so kids don't follow their parents into prison or into bad behaviours. And last person we've got is Shane Tong, so CDO of the ADHB and part of the Northern Response team. So I'll let him correct me on what I've got wrong in that and politely hand over to you, Shane, if you're happy to go first, to share a 5-minute focus about a future with COVID, whatever that might be.
Yes, well, welcome and good morning, everyone. It's certainly not a future of living with COVID. It's a current state of living with COVID. So as Ryan mentioned, I'm the executive lead across the northern region, which is everything from Northland through to South Auckland, around managing the COVID health response and more recently the vaccination. So that health response is based in central Auckland there. We have a command centre there with Defence, MB, Health, Ministry of Health, et cetera, et cetera. So it's quite a large response. But I guess my responsibility over the last 12 to 18 months is to make sure that the initially with the original outbreak that we could work remotely. So obviously we have people in our health systems that needed to work remotely, and we aren't a sector that has a tradition of having a large populations of our workforce out working remotely. So there was a massive expansion of technology to work remotely, but also from a hospital perspective with regards to outpatients. And so within a week, we had 100% of managing outpatients remotely, and that was quite a significant change. Also, too, a lot of work around managing the pandemic response and preparing the hospital for worst case scenarios, for negative pressure rooms, and a lot of virtual equipment in there so that people could continue to operate. There's also the massive community testing and making sure that all the infrastructure was set up for the community testing sites, which and drive-throughs, etc. And of course, we've had to stand them back up again a few times throughout the last 18 months, and even with this current outbreak, the amount of testing that we're doing at the moment is even more than the original outbreaks. So that ability to scale quickly has been quite considerable, and we're almost in a BAU situation of being able to scale up and down quite quickly, with our biggest constraint really being workforce, and not necessarily the technology and the digital perspective. So there's been a massive amount of scale up, a massive amount of remote working. There's been a lot of digital acceleration over that period of time, where we've had to effectively set up, new entities, greenfield entities, to manage the response. And so, we have hundreds of people working in this response. So how do we manage our workforce? So there's a lot of work around staff redeployment applications. So again, a massive amount of staff being pulled out of the health system to manage the response. So how do we manage that in a more automated and digital way? So there's a lot of things there. In this year, again, we had to develop a booking system fairly quickly. We had to wait a few months until the national booking system for vaccinations was up. And so that responsiveness of being able to move into the cloud, leverage cloud platforms, are things that, and the pace that we're moving at is not what you normally relate to a traditional sort of public sector health system. And so really what we are now living with is a new way of working. And that's holding us in good stead for the health sector reforms and the digital transformation, healthcare transformation, which is required over the next many years to move into one health system. And we've been working very well regionally with this response, and the future looks more like a regional operating model from a healthcare system, working in with a national health system. So there's a lot of things there. I don't think this is the future. I think this is the now and the norm, and it's just how do we blend the good things that have occurred in digital perspective and into
Look, just having some connectivity issues with you there, Shane. I don't know if you can hear me. Sorry, Shane, we just had some connectivity issues, at least at my end, with what you were saying. Not sure if you might have frozen now as well. Are you there? I think we can at least see you moving now. Yep. Okay. So we just had some connectivity issues over the last 15 seconds or so, and didn't hear the end of, weren't able to hear the end, at least on my side of what you were saying. But yeah, okay. I was trying to keep up with that rundown of all of these things that are happening, and I thought I'd just add a little bit of context before we move on to our next speaker. So a lot of people that don't work in technology out there, see something like Facebook pop up a new feature today and then change it tomorrow. And the reality is that there's only Facebook and Google that can make changes to technology that fast with their size, scale, and budgets. Normal organizations, let's say, like most of the rest of the world, including New Zealand Health, can't do and achieve that. So when you talked about waiting a month or two for the national vaccine booking system to come up, people who don't know the realities of tech might think, oh, but Facebook does it. And of course, Facebook has billions of dollars in huge teams, and that's how they can. Mm-hmm. The other thing was I actually went through testing station yesterday. So I was booked for the 28th for my second jab, but my wife was booked for yesterday, and we were just sitting there the night before, and about 9:51 I was messaging Shane Hunter saying, hey, just to let you know, my wife got a booking confirmation email, a booking confirmation text, and a reminder email, a reminder text for her first shot, but for the second shot we got nothing. And as I press send, and Nikki goes, I've just got it. and it was changing. What it was I think the thing was it changed her from the original booked appointment to going to Trust Arena, and we sat in the queue. Like we went for 11 o'clock appointment that originally was. Sorry, I'll bring us all back to this view for this. So for 11 o'clock appointment, we went at 10:30, got there at 10:45, sat in the queue, and didn't get jabbed till a bit later, and it took about an hour, the whole process. But it was like, considering it got stood up, I think, yesterday, and we were in the queue at 11 o'clock yesterday. The ushers ushered us through with clockwork. The nurses handled us. The people that put our numbers on the window screen, so your COVID number, not your COVID number, your NHI number on the window screen. They did all the checks, balances, moved us through to the waiting area. We had the people, and they were so cheery, and so, so we were giving them big thanks. And yeah, it's quite a momentous effort. If anyone hadn't quite realised, it is. So thank you very much. What we'll do is move on to our next person, and we'll come back to an open discussion at the end, just as a reminder if you've just come onto the call, just watching. So we'll get to ask Shane a few questions and the other guests. So now we'll go to Jon Foote, and I'll just start by sharing the slides with his graphs and get those into position so that we can have a look at the work that Jon's been doing with data and get him to share the story. So I'll sit on this view, and I think if I go back, you'll see the full page. So Jon, if you'd like to take it away and direct me as to which graph you might want to close up on.
Yeah, we can start there. So a little bit of a background. So I'm one of the founders of a business intelligence consultancy practice called Flock Consulting. One of the things that we do, obviously, with my specialization around data visualization is try to turn numbers into visualizations so that they're easier to understand and consume. This process of developing the the COVID visualizations that you see now started last year when we first went into lockdown, and we kind of, I kind of looked at it and thought, well, there's so many numbers flying around, and it's really difficult for people to comprehend what those numbers really mean. And one of the things that we really focus on is the idea of context and relationships with numbers, because the reality is a number doesn't really mean much unless it's related to something. So what I've done in this case here is try to look at, with this new outbreak that we've got, is actually try to look at what the new numbers mean in comparison to some of the old numbers. So what you're looking at here is the outbreaks and the daily numbers in relationship to what I've kind of picked as day one, which is essentially when we've gone into lockdown. In some cases it's level 3, or in some cases level 2. But what we can see here is kind of the 4 major lockdowns that we've had in New Zealand. The main one being the first lockdown in the blue line, and 2 subclusters that we had with Papatoetoe and Americold, and then the current one, which is the Auckland Delta. So as we get fed numbers, on a daily basis, it's hard to comprehend what that really means. So what we've done here is sort of pull those together and visualize them in context to those other lockdowns. So we can see now where we're at with yesterday's numbers of 62, how that relates to the original lockdown. So we get a meaningful kind of understanding of the difference, I guess, between the original version of COVID and now the Delta, considering we went straight into lockdown. So it's interesting to see a slower uptake initially, but that's because our lockdown started later because of the way the outbreak came and then what we knew. It appears like we're growing slower, but we're certainly getting to the same sorts of daily levels as what we saw in the original outbreak. If we move across to the right, this is difficult for some people to understand, but this is a cumulative table that shows us the number of cases on a log scale. So the log scale is an interesting one because as you can see on the side, it goes from 0 to 500 to 1,000. And it actually, what you don't see there is the next one sort of goes up to 10,000. And so a log scale helps us understand the line of the slope. And you can see the first lockdown, the slope never really turned too vertical. And that's that's sort of based on the trajectory of the cases and the fact that we went into lockdown and started to pull things around. So when we look at the next slide, it'll be quite interesting to see the difference. But generally, where the line starts to flatten, and we've started to see a peak in the daily numbers, and then it accumulates at a flat line, which is when the numbers are growing less and less on a daily basis. So we can see now where our current Auckland Delta is growing. We can sort of go down to the bottom left-hand corner, which gives us the ability to look at everything over time. So we can see now the original lockdown, and this is a 7-day rolling average. So instead of being too jerky on the lines, it gives us a flatter line so that we can see the numbers over time. And obviously now, again, when we look at context and relationship, we can see now the current outbreak in comparison to the previous spikes in the past on that 7-day rolling average. And then again, just on that right-hand bottom corner, it's just another view. So if we move across, another view of different ways of looking at it. And this is, the red bars are showing us the growth in numbers of cases compared to the previous day. So the trend of the lines is indicating that the numbers are increasing on a daily basis. As soon as we see the bars turn negative, means that we're reducing the number of daily cases, and that we can see that we're starting to turn the corner. And then we've got the 7-day average over the period that we've seen so far. Now, again, sort of looking at this in context, if we, especially around the Delta variant and what we're looking at in comparison to the way our lockdown's being handled. If you go down to the next slide on the left-hand side, we're looking at Australia. So the orange line is the current outbreak. And it's quite interesting to see again that it's a slightly flatter start to it, potentially because again they've gone into their lockdown faster than they did previously, but potentially their type of lockdown hasn't actually got a hold of it, and we can see there it's looking pretty scary. So if we move across again, it's the same sort of the chart's the same. Now we can look at the log, and we can actually see now how drastic the current one looks, because there's no real indication of the flattening of the line yet. So they're a long way off of getting, they're a long way off of what seemingly getting control of it. And we can probably think that generally at about the time the line starts to flatten is probably about the halfway point for their lockdown and the outbreak itself. So yeah, some would assume that they've got some time to go before they really get a hold of it, or depending on what they consider to be a handle on it. We can skip over the next two, but it's basically showing similar things to what we saw before, the comparison over time, and then the daily case numbers. And we can see there that they've had some days where there's been a reduction in the number of daily cases, but generally the trend is still up. So again, back to the relativity. So if we go to the next slide, this is now putting New Zealand in the context, I guess,
I didn't realize it was a third one.
of our region. There's actually a fourth one as well. We'll go quickly because you're running out of time. But we can just see there, again, we're looking at 4 outbreaks. New Zealand's original one in blue, our Delta one in red, and then the 2 Australian ones. So in the context of total numbers, that gives us some relativity and understanding what we're like in comparison to Australia. Without really having to calculate the numbers, we can just see visually. And we're going to see the same sorts of things. So we can skip to the last one, because the last sheet, because what people have been asking is saying, we shouldn't just be looking at cases. We should really be comparing hospitalizations and deaths. And it's almost, the tone is almost like, cases aren't a big deal. It's really hospitalizations and deaths. But, from my perspective, putting these two on the same place, there's a complete direct correlation. The more cases you get, the more hospitalizations you're going to get. So these are Australia only, but it's, just showing the correlation between daily new cases and hospitalizations. And then over on the right hand there, it's a rolling 7-day of hospitalizations versus a 7-day rolling deaths. So we can see, correlation is not causation, but in this case, we can probably consider some form of correlation. And then the bottom left corner, we can just see that deaths and those the one above it and that one there correlate on the dates. So there's definitely, I think a reduction in cases is definitely going to lead to a reduction in deaths. So that's kind of what we've been working on. It's very much about trying to simplify the numbers and give people context and understanding around what we're looking at and what we're dealing with.
So that's hang on, let me get you in the middle seat. So I think everyone would have just got quite a I can't think of the right word, but assurance of what actually is happening by seeing it laid out and explained in the manner you just have. Because yes, I struggle myself. I don't know if everybody else does, but you do the 1 p.m. daily update and you get that day's information. You're like, how does it? You start getting lost in a sea of information, and it's almost like, is this lever up or that lever down? Where are we at it? So a great rundown there for us, and I think we'll definitely be coming back to that. And are you happy? That's shared publicly, isn't it? So anyone that wants to can actually go and have a look at that. Or
not at the moment. I've only put that on LinkedIn, but I put that PDF this morning, so I'll be able to share that.
Okay. Yep. Are you happy to share that? Cool. Thank you very much. And as I say, a reminder to everyone, we will come back to questions at the end once we've got through everybody's 5-minute focus. And I think we'll probably pop that back up on screen for a bit of a chat. I'm sure Shane's got some good questions and insights there. So now if we go to Lisa, so I'll swap you people over. Excuse me for saying guys. So this is Lisa Mead. So you might have seen Lisa on the show in the past. This is actually Lisa's 3rd time. The most recent time was about the launch of her, or the writing of her book, which is about experiencing domestic violence and being written for the hope that it will help other people in those situations, because there is a called battered wife syndrome. And it's when someone, you might know someone who's in a domestic violence situation and you just can't understand why they don't leave, and you get frustrated with them for not leaving. This is battered wife syndrome. It's almost, the way I had explained, it's almost unexplainable why people don't, but they've almost trapped somehow psychologically in the situation. Lisa thankfully managed to get out and has a wonderful 12-year-old son. And the other part of her work around running her accountancy firm is intergenerational change, i.e. the stuff I see that she's doing with her son, she's now helping other kids with it as well, so that they don't follow down, say, the footpaths of his father. And with that, I'll hand over to you to provide your 5-minute focus for a future with COVID, whatever that may be.
Yeah, so I guess for me, it's not so much about the domestic violence at the moment or for this segment, but that is definitely a concern of mine, because I've been in that situation and I know it's spiking at the moment. So if anyone does need to reach out for help, I would recommend that they do that. But yeah, the thing that I wanted to talk about today is around my work with at-risk youth. So I work with vulnerable youth. My business is set up to support at-risk kids. So kids in low decile schools with risk factors, those who may be living in lower socioeconomic areas and households. So I guess for me, when I saw that there was a bit of a change around 12 to 15-year-olds being able to self-consent for the vaccine, I know this is a bit of a hot topic, but for me, this is my personal opinion, my take. And because I have a 12-year-old myself, I feel like I may be an appropriate person to have an opinion on this. I mean, for a very basic level, my son is 12. He turned 12 about a month ago now, and he's not actually allowed to leave home. He's not allowed to stay home alone until he's 14. So for me, I'm kind of trying to align that rule with this new self-consenting vaccine kind of thing that they've brought in. So for me, I look at my son and I think, what has he got on his plate right now? What is the messaging out there for me as a parent to be supporting him? So it's a really strong message around trying to support his mental health. Obviously, he's got homeschooling to be doing, a lot of significant change happening. Obviously, we dealt with it last year, but also we live in Canterbury, so we are or he is considered an earthquake baby. So there's a lot of anxiety for kids who went through that. There's a lot of trauma. There's a lot of stuff that they've had to deal with that maybe kids in other cities in the country haven't had to go through. So from that perspective, I really think about what is my son's capability to make a really good decision for himself about something that is what I would consider reasonably significant. And so, yeah, it comes back to, for me, what's the state of his mental health at a really basic level. I want to make sure that my son is actually feeling really confident in himself to be able to make a decision like that. And I'm just going to share something that is quite personal for me, but yeah, he's been struggling the last month with his personal mental health, and I didn't think that I was going to be a parent that would have to deal with that. So and I've seen so many stories on LinkedIn, on social media around parents that have lost their children, and I really have to think about that sort of stuff. And how is giving my son right now an extra responsibility to make a decision like this, how is that good for his mental health? How is he really able and ready to make that decision? And for me as a parent, maybe if he was 14, I might be making a different assumption around this, and I might have a different opinion towards it. But for me, in my situation right now, I look at my son and all he wants me to do is support him as a parent. And if it's making decisions for him that make his life easier, then that's one of those things that I can do. So yeah, I just really want to keep a focus around, what is the unintended consequences that might come from this for these kids who are, able to make a reasonably big decision now. And, are we thinking about down the track? Are we thinking about a year, 2, 3 later when, they've had to make this decision? And is it too much pressure for kids if they've got some other stuff going on? And, there's the real simple thing around an assumption of equity as well for kids, for 12-year-olds to assume that they all have the same literacy levels is just not correct. And that's for parents as well. So there's a lot of parents out there that don't have great literacy levels as well. So there's going to be homes with kids in them that don't have access to the same resources, the same information, the same devices even. So giving a child an option to make a decision, do they have access to those resources to make that decision? It's, equity is a really big thing in New Zealand. And I think we do have to think about that. But yeah, it's a thing that I think about the brain development for these kids as well. I've studied psychology and sociology before, and I know that for children in adolescence, their prefrontal cortex is not fully developed, which means that's the area that really allows us as adults to make decisions based on looking at the risk and the benefits and the pros and cons and really making a good decision about that. And so for these kids, they're actually using a part of their brain called the amygdala, which overrides the prefrontal cortex. And it kind of comes from a place of emotion, reaction, and that sort of thing. So, when I think about my son, and this is really just my opinion and my take, I'm thinking he's already in a really emotive state at the moment, really trying to just deal with changes in his life. And so if I'm giving him a decision like this and he's already in that place, is he going to make the best decision? I don't know. And I think, like for me personally, if the age was 14 plus, I could totally understand that, because, I know that my son is not assumed to be going to be burning the house down when I leave the house and he's at home at 14. And that's what I think about. That's, from 12 and 13, we assume that our kids are not safe at home alone. Why are they given the opportunity now to make that decision? And my big focus is on equity, on mental health for these kids. And is it the right kind of pressure to be giving them right now?
That's a really good rundown and a great way to close out that session of, is it the right question to be asking them? And I'll just add 2 cents. Does anyone enjoy the lowering of drinking age? I actually was on the Otago Regional Youth Council that fought for it, and we lost in Parliament 62-60, I think it was. Then I went to my OE, and while I was on my OE and came back as a 25-year-old, it had been lowered to 18, and I went to the bar that I used to go to, Foxy's. John might remember that one in Dunedin. And there were 5, I'll say kids, lying in puddles of puke outside the door. And I said to the bouncer, aren't you going to do something about it? This is wrong and dangerous. And he said, it's in public. See, I clean those 5 away, I get 5 more. And I went, oh my goodness. Unintentional consequences, right? So who knows what they will be, but some very good questions and really pertinent points and questions related to the whether a 12-year-old can make those decisions, and if they can, what effect is it having on them? So if we can now introduce our final speaker, and then we'll get to open discussion. So if we go back to our, is it this one? And bring on Simon Martin. So I'd just like to take a moment to introduce Simon. I work with Hudson Gavin Martin, or they work with me. They provide my law services, and over the time of the relationship, I've got to know Simon extremely well. And every time I go to him with a discussion, let alone a problem, he always brings a very sage and considered response back to me, often which I'm not expecting. So in terms of diverse, we might look quite similar. Don't be offended, mate. I know you got more here, but on top at least. But he always brings a very different perspective, and I think it's due to experience in the legal profession. So with that, I'd like you to give us your 5-minute focus, and look forward to hearing them.
Thanks, Ryan. I'm going to. I guess I think you've introduced me as a lawyer, and I kind of that's what I do. I am somebody that specialises in tech and media and IP. But really, when you think about that area, that's the area where there is this massive amount of change, and so in some ways, there's almost a bit of a change navigator aspect to what I do. And if not now, I don't know when change has become so forced upon us. There is no choice but to actually embrace it. I mean, we find ourselves in another lockdown right now, and I think part of what we're having to do, and I think this is whether it's on an individual basis, whether it's on a business basis, or whether it's on a nation basis, part of what we're having to do is reflect on who we are and who we want to be and what we want to achieve and what is the right thing to do. And how do we achieve that? And the obvious thing that is being presented to us through COVID is that we just can't do that alone. Everybody needs to work together to get to this point where we're going to be able to control what is going on, if we are ever going to have a chance to control it. And then the other thing I think that we've kind of seen through this process is that no one person can succeed by themselves, and nobody really wants to succeed by themselves, because there's just not the same kind of ability to achieve what you need to achieve if you're just kind of doing it by yourself. And you can see that kind of manifesting itself in the sort of stuff that that Shane was talking about in terms of a national coordinated, but also a regional kind of work-based approach to that, to attacking COVID itself. Technology is part of the answer, and of course I'm going to say that because I'm a technology lawyer. But what we're finding is that technology is assisting us to understand better what is going on. It's also allowing us to change the way in which we engage with each other in a circumstance where we can't do what we've traditionally done, which is much more face-to-face. We've found ourselves in the first lockdown having to very, very quickly kind of lift and shift to a different environment. And that sounds all really easy, but we need to make sure that it works. We need to make sure it works on so many different levels. Does it work in terms of a business focus? Does it work in terms of a personal focus? And is everybody okay through it? And so there's a lot more effort that has to be put into that. And I'm not sure necessarily whether we've all got to that right point at the moment. That kind of, is a bit about, as we've, as Lisa has just kind of said, are we looking after everybody and everybody that's vulnerable? That's the challenge that we have, is to make sure that we lift for everybody here. We find ourselves now, 16 months on in another lockdown, and you can say, look, people have adapted in some ways. We've really adapted. We've kind of the uptake and the ability to kind of get back to where we were has been so much easier this time than the last time. But I don't know about anybody else. But I'm certainly finding this lockdown harder. And I think part of that is because, yes, we have been able to just get back into this, almost Groundhog Day aspect of it. But at the same time, when we got out of lockdown last time, I really appreciated so many more of those things that I had taken for granted previously. And I'm really missing those now, that, those freedoms, that casual interaction with people that you just don't get anymore. I mean, I love my family, but it'd be nice to interact with other people as well, on a personal basis. And then if you look at that, and then you start to look at the way in which you take that and you start to apply that into business environments. And when you think about the fact that so many of New Zealand's businesses are small businesses, and the challenges that they are finding in terms of, looking after their staff, looking after, how do they kind of pivot to a new kind of reality when they're sitting in lockdown, and what kind of support are they getting? And so there's some real challenges there, and there is massive opportunity and challenge. And we've seen people adapt, but I don't know whether we are quite ready for the level of adaptation and the level of change that we're needing to have at the moment. And I can see that there is a little bit of kind of creaking at the edges in terms of that for different people. So there needs to be more support kind of provided around that. We're seeing businesses kind of re-engineer themselves. They're going back, they're being forced to go back and look at their business and jettison the things that don't make sense, and kind of have a crack at things that they've kind of, to see whether they're going to work. And I think one of the things, and maybe it's a bit of a liberating thing, the reality is that everybody's having to be a little bit more agile, and they're having an agile mindset put upon them. There is a certain level of risk with being agile, when you don't know necessarily where you're going to get to. But I think the liberating aspect of it is, but there is no choice. And so nobody can kind of look at you from the outside and say, why the hell did you do that? It's like, well, I can't just stand still. I have to do something different. And so I'm going to give this a crack. And if it doesn't make sense, I will try and pivot and change from this to something else. And we're seeing a lot more businesses having a crack at doing that, being that much more agile in terms of their approach and their way to kind of encounter and overcome these challenges that they're facing. And I've got to say, some people, and I would put myself in the business that I'm in that category, to some extent, it's quite liberating having that ability to do it and not have people kind of say, why on earth are you doing that? I think the other thing that I've seen over the last 16 months is that New Zealand really has kind of hit the world stage a bit because of the way in which we've kind of attacked this challenge. And people are kind of looking at New Zealand and saying, this is a really brave country. It's a small country, but it's a brave country that's really kind of taken this thing on. And that in itself has kind of presented us to the world stage in a way that people are starting to, and I've seen with my with some of my clients, that they've had opportunities presented to themselves that they might not have had otherwise. I've had, over the last 16 months, I've had a number of my clients doing some significant multinational based deals in terms of people coming to New Zealand and saying, this is a pretty cool country, this is a pretty cool community, I'd like to try something new in this community. I'd like to see what I can achieve with a community that does what you have done already. And so that's pretty cool. And it's enabled some businesses to kind of go to a whole different level from where they were before. It's really kind of almost supercharged some of the opportunities that have kind of come through. But at the same time, and this comes back to what I was saying at the beginning, it's also highlighted that there are some significant gaps. My wife is a teacher, and you can see very much the challenge between the haves and the have-nots. And one thing that I think everybody has learned through this, COVID is not going to be beaten unless we all pull together. And I think that mindset also needs to be done, not only in relation to COVID, but in relation to the way in which we interact with each other, the way in which we support each other through this challenge. I'm encouraged by some of the things like the government and business efforts on the digital boost, where they're looking at ways in which they can try and get people better engaged. I think, I'm encouraged by some of the efforts that have been done around trying to get more technology and more enablement into those communities that haven't had it. We just need to make sure that we don't leave people behind. And I guess that's that's the big kind of outlook I have in relation to this, is that COVID and where we find ourselves, there's no denying there's massive amounts of challenge in it, but in that challenge, there's massive amounts of opportunity. I think what I'm seeing is that there is a chance for business to re-engineer itself. There is a chance for us to be able to do things smarter, do things better, not just necessarily the business side, but also the government and services side as well. And I'm really encouraged by what I'm seeing in all of that. I just want to make sure that we actually lift it for everybody, and that's the challenge.
Yes, absolutely. To that point, the lifting it for everybody. And I think the discussion we had the other day, there's some aspects of that coming in. And I've got to confess, on the first call, first session with Ray and Kay Marie, I spoke about walking past a school and seeing people in the playground, and saying to my wife, I should go and say something. And she said, no, move on. Well, I've got to be honest. I actually did go into the school and challenge the people and just said to them, I said, hey, look, we'd all love to be playing basketball, but we can't. So by you playing basketball when you're not meant to, everyone else walks by going, shall I go and play basketball? I said, imagine if you had 5 or 6 groups in here playing basketball because you played basketball first and you all spread COVID amongst each other. I said, now that's 40, 50 people in my community that are possibly going to die because of COVID because one group of people play basketball. Do you really want to be that group of people that play basketball? And initially the teenagers in the group, because it's teenage boys and grown men, initially they went, ooh, you can imagine what they might say. But thankfully the adults sort of looked at each other and went, oh, we thought this was okay. Yep, okay, pack it up, boys. So I left and went back to my wife and joined her. And they went on their way and did that. But I sort of, I felt a responsibility. Also was a bit pissed off about the fairness. And because we can't walk our dog in the school now. We used to take the dog to the school and throw the ball on the park, but we can't do that because it's all closed off. So here's some people flouting what we can't do. So yeah, I think and that's one level of bringing us all together, thinking of Lisa's equity. You're talking about digital boost and, different parts of the community. So with that, we now are into open discussion time. So I'm not sure if there's anything that we picked up there that someone would particularly like to start with, or if you would want me to pick something. Shane?
Oh.
John? So I'll pick something. So I thought if I can bring up the slides from John again, and I'm going to go back to that very first one, which shows the relevancy of lockdown. So all the people that are, I know it's hard because I'm finding it hard too, but it's like walking up a hill is hard as well, but sometimes we've got to get to the top of that hill. So this is just a bloody big hill in some regards. Mm-hmm. But I just thought, I think it's that one that probably shows it best, but maybe it's this one here that shows, I think if we look at that 211 there, as we're just starting to curl up, I think we're going to start to see it plateau somewhere here rather than it reaching up to the 1,000 mark. And I think it's this one here that shows the difference of the purple and the orange lines are the we'll call it the standard COVID, not Delta, the original COVID, and how lockdown effectively brought those down very quickly. And there's a scrappy little tail to it closing out, which is quite visibly different. That these two sit down here versus getting up as much as the original, or obviously as much as Delta, which is getting up that high because it's a much faster spreading virulent strain. So in terms of that sort of picture, does everyone feel quite agreed, or that's correct? And what John and I'm reiterating is that the lockdowns, while painful, are effective.
Because I looked at this and thought, it's interesting, but if you bring it back up, there's the problem with looking at numbers, and to be honest, the numbers that I've got there, or the chart there, tells a story, but it doesn't tell the full story. And you never can tell the full story, because if you think about the first lockdown, we had probably a 30 to 40 day lead in to that lockdown. And so, numbers have spiked really quickly, but the reality is they were building over time. And so when we went into that lockdown, we started to do testing, and that's why we see those numbers from that lockdown. The lockdown we have now, obviously, we went into straight away. We hit lockdown first case. The other difference between the first lockdown and this one is we've got contact tracing. So we've got the ability to go out now and really target the testing, whereas in the first lockdown we just had to kind of scattergun approach. So although these timelines are based on lockdowns, the reality is it's not based on the outbreak. If we were able to look at from the first case rather than the point of lockdown, then the first and the current Delta will look quite different. It'd be a lot more of a lead in, and a lot of that will just be because of the way the testing's done. Because first lockdown, the first case, we probably weren't testing until we had a major cluster like the Bluff cluster, in which case it spiked really quickly. Obviously, what happened in Queenstown, the virality of the current one is also a lot higher. So I'm not sure, and we just can't tell at what point this is going to peak and then start to come off. But what we do know is that the likelihood of it peaking and coming off quicker is possible because of the lockdown. The other thing too is because of the more targeted testing based on contact tracing, we're likely to see more of the current cases actually be picked up sooner as well. So the steep line could be quite a good thing, because it means we're actually picking up a lot of those initial cases quicker.
That's a really good point that might be lost on people like myself. The really steep line is good news because we're picking everything up rather than not picking it up, in which case it doesn't become a massive whack in a week's time when we suddenly find out about thousands of cases we didn't know about. Let me just add in from our AFQA cafe, the call this morning had a lady, Michelle, call in from the UK. We'll be doing a session with her for Talanoa Live. So she got COVID in December, and just now in the UK they don't have any lockdown, and they're now having a massive wave. They had 6,125 hospitalizations, not cases, overnight. And they've had a 25% increase in cases in the last week. And bars, clubs, everything are open and people are going to them. And they've got, I think, a 70% immunity. And I think, if I'm not wrong, Shane, it's 90% that's considered herd immunity. But people are getting reinfected. So with, I think it's Delta, it may also be Lambda, which is coming out of Peru, if I'm not wrong. But there's reinfections, so people are getting sick again. Now, Michelle also happens to be a long COVID sufferer, so she still has muscle aches and can't walk the dog more than 20 minutes, can't smell or taste food, can just smell and taste a really good curry, but normal everyday or other food that isn't so strong, she can't smell. But the attitude in the UK is, we're sort of over it. But the final thing I'll add is that even with 6,100 hospitalizations yesterday, new hospitalizations, it's nothing like in their original peak. So they're kind of like, we've been here before. This is nothing. So I guess it comes down to me. I think on an individual level, if you get COVID and die, and you hear about those people screaming in the last few hours of gurgling their breath, that sounds terrible and really scary. Or long COVID, you're screwed for the rest of your life, like a couple of friends of mine. I'd much prefer lockdown. And ideally, I think the theory is that if we're in lockdown and we get vaccinated, then no one gets hit to the point that we're gurgling it to death. And I'm not sure about long COVID, but hopefully it helps with not being infected with long COVID. But do we have any idea, Shane, why long COVID hits some people, or why people are affected in different ways by COVID?
No, look, I'm not a clinician, so probably not best for me to, I could make some assumptions, but probably not best placed for that. But, just responding to John and the data points there, this is 6 to 7 times more spreadable than the first one. And so that spike is really, really important because, and the testing to support that. And the quick lockdown. And I think, yes, it's still going to spike for a few days longer before it starts to plateau down, and it'll probably be quite a long plateau down because of the number of close contacts and all the contact tracing. Of course, even the testing volumes can take 24, 48 hours to get a test back. So you could still be. The good news is you should be at home isolating while you're having a test anyway. So that the risk of transmission is less. But so I think we've still got a bit in this, particularly Auckland. I think there's still a few weeks in this, and all I encourage is New Zealanders to get out there and get vaccinated. And I guess looking as a parent and as a father and that, with regards to vaccinations with children, I see this no different than you have taken your child in their early days to get their measles vaccinations and all these vaccinations that children need. I see this just being another one of those, and it's for the good and health of your children, but also the community as general. But I say that as a parent, and from my perspective around vaccinations.
Okay, yeah, that's another good way of looking at it. It's like the fact we already take a range of existing vaccines, and I guess I don't know about the stats, but these are the sorts of links I'd like to eventually put into the chat sometime after the call. Is that the flu vaccine, the Spanish flu, which was 1918, the first vaccine wasn't administered until 1930, and it didn't get provided to the masses until 1945 in America, so it wasn't even global at that point. So here we are in 2021 with the ability and probably the computing power to work faster and deliver a vaccine. I guess anything new, anything health related, and you have a range of different groups, from the anti-vaxxers to, I was watching a video from the ministry of, I think it's a Fijian ministry video. I couldn't understand the Fijian, but I could understand the English subtitles, that there's not a microchip in the vaccination. So I think there are some valid concerns with the vaccination being new. And by the way, I've had 2 jabs. So I think it's valid to think there's a concern because it's a new vaccination. That's fair enough. But there's certainly not anything like a microchip in there, or anything as extreme as that. So yeah. The other thing that Michelle shared was, I asked her, because this is the lady from the UK, she had the AstraZeneca vaccine, and I said, they've seen reports of that causing blood clots, and they're operating on a person, and as they remove one blood clot, another blood clot appeared. And she said, yeah, woman taking the pill causes more blood clots than the AstraZeneca one by stats, if I use that technical term. So putting it in context that way, you sort of think, okay. And again, misinformation is probably our biggest concern. So want to enable the right information to be shared, consumed, and any misinformation to be identified, so that yes, we can deal with real facts and not emotional concerns and drivers. So if we start thinking about wrapping up, if I could ask you to think of closing comment for the listeners, and I'm just thinking something sort of like a one-liner, the thing that you would like to leave them with from today, and just fill a little bit more airtime while I give you some thinking space, because it's been a great session. So just to do a bit of a summary, we've heard from Shane Tong, who's given us a rundown of the operation and response from the, I guess, New Zealand government, or a health response, and getting things stood up from vaccination bookings through to the drive-through vaccination spaces. We've heard from Jon, who's a data visualization specialist, who showed us with graphs the story of COVID, and gave us some great context of what it does tell us, what it doesn't tell us, and things to take into account when looking at these. Lisa, who spoke about the 12 to 15-year-old consent for vaccination, and all the different aspects from the pressure it puts on a person at that age, especially the younger part of the age bracket, the 12-year-olds like her son, through to other aspects of the picture. And finally, with Simon, who gave a pretty good helicopter view, I think, of the amount of change that we're dealing with, what's happening for business, the ability to reinvent with digital, and another area that the government's working hard in with the digital boost to help impacted businesses move to a digital way of operating. So with that, if we start with Simon and go back the other way that we came.
So I guess I would say, change is happening. There's a lot of opportunity in that change. We just need to make sure that we move everybody together.
Yep, everyone together. So no one playing basketball when we're all not allowed to go and play basketball, if I make it that simple. Jon? Oh, you're on mute. Yeah, I got to say it once.
You think I would have learned that one by now? Look, I think we've used quite often 1 o'clock sessions. We're focused on the numbers, but for me, it's just put it in context. It's there's a lot of stuff going on in the background, and we just got to make sure that those numbers are always put in context of what's happening.
Absolutely, context. Context is everything almost, and I think there's a comment here about your stats coming up. The next one from Anthony. Particularly enjoyed the context on the graphs. So with that, I'll pull that one down. Thank you, Anthony, Rover, and Benton. To you, Lisa, for closing remarks.
Yeah, I would just reiterate, just parents check in on your kids anyway on their mental health, having face-to-face conversations. Obviously, it's usually a car that is a good place to have a conversation, but now we're stuck in our houses, so it gives you a time to really have a chat and check in and see how your child or your children really are. And let's not forget that there is a mental health crisis in New Zealand. Let's not put pressure on kids if it's not necessary. But yeah, it's all about protecting our kids if we can from anything that may cause extra pressure for them at the moment.
Yep, thank you very much. And Shane.
Yeah, look, I just say but from a health perspective, just make sure you keep doing the right things during the lockdown, and stay safe, and keep talking to each other, and keeping close to your whānau and friends and others, because that's what will get us through, is making sure that we're keeping connected and joined up and talking to each other.
Awesome. Oops, hang on. Where am I going? Hang on. I'll stick with that view. So thank you very much to everybody. And just a reminder that Sir Ian Taylor had a clash with judging the Māori Business Awards and had sessions starting from, I think it was 8 a.m. through to 9:30, then 9:30 through to 11. But he will be on tonight. We're going to have what we call the town hall, where it's open to everyone. We're going to have a range of people speaking there, from Sir Ian Taylor, Brett O'Reilly, Yvonne Damond, Frankie Wang, quite a list, including Jenna Hollis, who's a graduate. So in terms of diversity, also Elia Chan. So really looking for greater diversity. And I want to extend the invite to people to put forward submissions. I saw a comment in here from Carolyn. So not just because you say you love it, but I would love to get you on here in one of the sessions, one of the shows. As everyone can probably see, we had started with 2. We've got 4 today. We're doing a town hall with more tonight. We've got some individuals sessions. It really is a mixed bag. And what over the whole course of Talanoa Live is we want to get a range of diverse perspectives on a future with COVID. At that same time, we want to be really careful about misinformation. And that's one of the things we hope to help, is by identifying through conversation if someone has the wrong idea, to help them and direct them to the right information, or if anyone has any questions about it. But of course, we will always revert to the government information, the Ministry of Health information, as our key source. So we will be taking that as our, I was going to say Holy Grail. Hope that's an okay reference in this day and age to use. That is the single source of the truth that we will live by. And if you have something that is different to it, then you need to approach the Ministry of Health to raise it with them to see if they will adopt that as the new replacement information. This is certainly not, what I'm going to be really clear about, this is certainly not the vehicle of anyone's opinion to become truth, but it's the ability for us to connect through conversation and to share thoughts, concerns, worries, support each other, and ultimately show that New Zealand can all work together to achieve what we're looking to do, which is to get everyone vaccinated and to get into lockdown to shut the spread, because no one wants to be that unfortunate person that passes away, or that has a family member pass away, or gets COVID, long COVID, if it wasn't necessary. If we can avoid it, let's try to do it. There's no promises that we can, but we are doing at the moment, as proven by the stats shown by John. Lockdowns have a great effect, so let's carry on with the program. And thank everybody for their time for sharing today. So with that, we'll round off with a ka kite anō together on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Ka kite anō. What happened to being together? Come on, we're trying to be the whānau of 5 million here. On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Ka kite anō.
Ka kite anō.
That will do. Thank you very much, team. All right.
Thanks, guys.
Yes.
Yeah.